walked out of Taba. It ended with the Israelis walking out of Taba, a matter of historical record, not even controversial.
Dr. Ben Ami.
Okay, well, you see, as somebody who was part of those who prepared the Israeli document that was submitted to President Clinton, I can say that the bulk of the document was an expression of our the comparison that we made between our initial positions and what was reflected in the Clinton parameters. It was not a series of reservations. It was basically a mention of the difference, the way that we have gone. This was an attempt to impress the president more than an attempt to say that these are reservations, sine qua non. There were no real reservations in our document, whereas in the Palestinian document there were plenty of them, with the refugees, with the Haram al-Sharif, with what have you. I mean, it was full of reservations from beginning to end. Ours was not a document about reservations. It was a statement, basically, that said, these were our positions, this is where we stand today. We have gone a very long way. We cannot go beyond that. This was essentially what we sent. Now, with regard to Taba, you see, we were a government committing suicide, practically. 2 weeks before general elections. The chief of staff, General Mofaz, who is now the Minister of Defense, comes and I say that in the book, in something that is tantamount to a coup d'etat, comes and say publicly that we are putting at risk the future of the State of Israel by assuming the Clinton parameters, and we accept them. We assume them. And then I go to Cairo and I meet President Mubarak. And President Mubarak invites Arafat to see me in Cairo. And I say to Arafat, we are going to fine-tune this in a meeting in Taba, if you wish. And then we go to Taba and we negotiate in Taba. And in Taba, Prime Minister Barak instructs me to conduct secret negotiations with Abu Ala. Within the negotiations, we had a second track, trying to reach an agreement. And he even agrees to all kinds of things that he was not very open to before that. Now, this was the end. We saw that we are not reaching an agreement. And we need to go back, even if for the electoral campaign. I mean, we were a week before the elections. I mean, we were practically non-existent. Our legitimacy as a government to negotiate such central issues as Jerusalem, as Temple Mount, the Temple, etc., was being questioned not only by the right that was making political capital out of it, but by the left, people from our own government. Shlomo Ben Ami is ready to sell out the country for the sake of a Nobel Prize. This is what Chaim Ramon said, one of the labor ministers. So it was unsustainable. We could not go any longer. So.
Former Israeli Foreign Minister Shlomo Ben Ami discussing the breakdown of the peace talks at Taba in January 2001. Israel and the Palestinians have not met for final status peace talks since. This is Democracy Now! Back with the final part of our debate after break. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we return to our debate between the former Israeli Foreign Minister, Shlomo Ben Ami, and Professor Norman Finkelstein, I asked Finkelstein to discuss a section in his new book called The Not So New Anti-Semitism.
Well, actually, I think it's useful to connect it with the conversation we've just had. Namely, I think when honest and reasonable people enter into a discussion about this topic, you'll have large areas of agreement, some area of disagreement. And frankly, and I'm not saying it to flatter, I say it because I believe it, I don't flatter by nature. I'm quite certain that if representatives of the Palestinians were to sit down with Shlomo Ben Ami in a room, weren't subjected to the sorts of political pressures that Dr. Ben Ami describes from Israel, I think a reasonable settlement could be reached. And I think he's reasonable, in my opinion. We can disagree on some issues, but he's reasonable. The problem is when you get to the United States. In the United States, among those people who call themselves supporters of Israel, we enter the area of unreason. We enter a twilight zone. American Jewish organizations, they're not only not up to speed yet with Steven Spielberg, they're still in the Leon Uris Exodus version of history, this land is mine, God gave this land to me. And anybody who dissents from this, you can call it lunatic version of history, is immediately branded an anti-Semite. And whenever Israel comes under international pressure to settle the conflict diplomatically, or when it is subjected to a public relations debacle, such as it was with the Second Intifada, a campaign is launched claiming there's a new anti-Semitism afoot in the world. There's no evidence of a new anti-Semitism. If you go through all the literature as I have, the evidence is actually in Europe, which is Dr. Ben Ami's half-home ground, Spain, but throughout Europe. The evidence is, if you look at like the Pew Charitable Trust surveys, anti-Semitism has actually declined since the last time they did the surveys. They did it in 1991 and 2002. They said the evidence is that it's declined. And the same thing in the United States. What's called a new anti-Semitism is anyone who criticizes any official Israeli policies. In fact, my guess is, had people not known who wrote Scars of War, Wounds of Peace, that book would immediately be put on the ADL's book list of verboten books, an example of anti-Semitism, because he says things like the Zionists wanted to transfer the Arabs out. That's anti-Semitism. It has nothing to do with the real world. It's a public relations extravaganza production to deflect attention from the facts, from the realities. And I think this afternoon in our exchange, there were some areas of disagreement for sure, but I think a lot of what Dr. Ben Ami said would not go down well with most of American Jewry. And that's when they'll soon be charging him with being an anti-Semite.
On the issue of language, terrorism, Arafat called terrorists, Hamas called terrorists. How would you describe the Israeli state when it attacks civilians in the occupied territories? Or how would you describe Ariel Sharon?
Well, let me tell you what is my description of terrorism. Terrorism, in my view, is an indiscriminate attack against civilian population. If I, personally, or my son, God forbid, is being attacked, being in uniform, in Palestinian territories by a Hamas squad, I will not define this as terrorism. I will define as terrorism if they go into a kindergarten or a mall, explode themselves, and cause injuries and death among civilian population. This, to me, is... Now, the problem of the response of a state is much more difficult to define, because a state needs to go not against the civilian population. It needs to go against military targets, ticking bombs. This is what states can do and should